The Nutty Putty cave that became a tomb represents one of the most heartbreaking examples of how poor decision-making can lead to irreversible consequences. John Edward Jones was a 26-year-old medical student who entered Utah's Nutty Putty cave system on November 24, 2009. This wasn't supposed to be a dangerous expedition. Jones was celebrating Thanksgiving with his brother and 9 other cavers, exploring a cave system that had developed a reputation for challenging but manageable passages. The cave's name came from the distinctive putty-like clay that coated its interior walls. This same clay would prove to be a fatal characteristic that contributed directly to the tragedy that followed. What makes this story particularly tragic is that the cave had already demonstrated its lethal potential. So many rescue operations had been required that authorities had actually shut down the cave entirely in 2004. The decision to reopen the cave just 6 months before Jones's visit represented a catastrophic failure of institutional memory. New management implemented an online reservation system designed to prevent overcrowding, but this cosmetic change did nothing to address the fundamental dangers that had forced the initial closure. Jones made a decision that would cost him his life. Seeking out a tight passage known locally as the birth canal, he began wriggling headfirst into what he believed was a familiar route. Instead, he had taken a wrong turn that led him into an unmapped dead end measuring just 18 inches by 10 inches. The physics of his predicament were as simple as they were deadly. When he exhaled to attempt turning around, his chest cavity compressed. When he inhaled, his chest expanded, creating a human ratchet mechanism that locked him permanently in place. The rescue operation that followed involved over 100 people working desperately for 28 hours. The challenge wasn't simply the confined space, but the angle at which Jones was trapped, being suspended upside down at a 70-degree angle 150 feet below ground, put catastrophic stress on his cardiovascular system. The human heart isn't designed to pump blood upward against gravity from the lower extremities, while simultaneously managing the increased blood pressure in the brain. Rescuers implemented an elaborate rope and pulley system, drilling anchors into the cave walls in an attempt to extract Jones from his trap. At one critical moment, they managed to pull him upwards several feet, creating a brief moment of hope. Then the soft, unstable clay that gave the cave its name caused one of the pulley anchors to fail catastrophically. The lead rescuer was injured by the falling equipment, and Jones fell back into the crevice even deeper than before. After 28 hours of physiological stress that his heart simply couldn't endure, Jones was pronounced dead. The cave was deemed too dangerous for body recovery operations. The decision was made to seal the entire cave system permanently with concrete, creating what is essentially a massive underground tomb. Today, Nutty Putty Cave exists as a concrete-filled memorial to one wrong turn. The entire cave system has been banned to all future explorers forever. Jones's single navigation error didn't just cost him his life. It eliminated a recreational opportunity that had been enjoyed by thousands of cavers over many decades. Moving from underground tragedy to aviation security, we encounter the story of how one spectacularly incompetent terrorist attempt transformed global air travel forever. Richard Reed wasn't a criminal mastermind or a sophisticated operative. He was a petty criminal whose conversion to extremism in prison led him to become the unwitting tool of a more sophisticated terrorist cell operating out of Paris. Reed's attempt to destroy a commercial airliner was marked by incompetence from beginning to end. On December 22, 2001, he arrived at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, attempting to board a flight to Miami. His appearance was so suspicious that security personnel immediately flagged him for additional screening. Disheveled, carrying no checked luggage, and paying for his ticket in cash, Reed looked exactly like what he was, a dangerous individual with malicious intent. After hours of questioning, airline officials made the decision to deny him boarding. They told him to return the following day. This 24-hour delay should have been enough for Reed to recognize that his plan had been compromised and abort his mission. Instead, he returned the next day wearing the exact same shoes, now packed with a volatile, homemade explosive compound. During the flight, passengers began complaining about a strange smell of smoke. A flight attendant investigated and discovered Reed hunched over in his seat, attempting to ignite a fuse connected to his sneaker. His first attempt failed because the explosives had become damp, likely from his own perspiration during the previous day's intensive interrogation by security personnel. When Reed attempted to light the fuse again, flight attendant Hermes Moutardier grabbed his arm to stop him. Reed bit her hand in response. As he struggled to complete his attack, passengers quickly overwhelmed him. A 6'4" passenger helped restrain Reed using belts and headset cords, while 2 doctors aboard the flight administered sedatives from the plane's medical kit. The forensic analysis of Reed's shoe bomb revealed the depth of his incompetence. Investigators found palm prints and hair samples on the explosive device that didn't belong to Reed. They belonged to his bomb maker, who was never identified. This evidence suggested that Reed hadn't even constructed his own weapon, but had simply been handed a device by more sophisticated operatives, who remained safely anonymous. Reed's single failed attempt, which he had been given a full day's warning to reconsider, was enough to fundamentally transform global aviation security. The hypothetical threat was so terrifying that the entire travel industry was rebuilt around preventing similar attacks. Today, billions of travelers remove their shoes at security checkpoints because one incompetent extremist couldn't successfully light a fuse. The ripple effects of Reed's failure extend far beyond the inconvenience of airport shoe removal. The psychological impact of his attempted attack fundamentally altered how society perceives air travel safety. Every passenger boarding a flight now participates in an elaborate security theatre that exists because one man's bumbling terrorism attempt revealed vulnerabilities that authorities couldn't ignore. What makes Reed's case particularly infuriating is how his obvious incompetence still succeeded in achieving a form of victory. He failed to detonate his device, failed to harm anyone beyond a flight attendant's bitten hand, and failed to complete his mission. Yet his spectacular failure accomplished what a successful attack might not have: the permanent transformation of air travel for every future passenger. The next story demonstrates how obsessive dedication to a television game show created changes that persist decades later. Terry Keyes appeared to be just another contestant when he made it to the final showcase on The Price is Right in December 2008. What happened next had never occurred in the show's 36-year history. When host Drew Carey revealed the showcase prizes, which included a karaoke machine, pool table, and 16-foot camper, Keyes calmly submitted his bid of $23,743. Carey read the actual retail price, and the studio audience witnessed something impossible: a perfect bid down to the exact dollar. The celebration was short-lived. Carey's smile vanished as he suspected the show was being manipulated. Production stopped, producers flooded the studio floor, and what should have been a moment of triumph became an investigation. The real story wasn't about Keyes at all. It was about a man named Ted Slauson sitting in the audience. Slauson represented a new breed of game show obsessive. For decades, he had meticulously recorded and catalogued every prize that appeared on The Price is Right, building an extensive database that revealed the show's lazy practices. The producers recycled the same prizes at identical prices repeatedly, assuming that casual viewers wouldn't notice the patterns. Slauson had been attending tapings for years, shouting out correct prices to help contestants. The producers despised him and had attempted to ban him from the studio, but he simply returned in disguises. On this particular day, his friend Keyes had been selected as a contestant, and Slauson guided him through every pricing game by signaling from the audience. When the final showcase was revealed, Slauson held up 3 fingers to indicate 23,000, then flashed the numbers 7, 4, and 3. Keyes simply repeated the bid his friend had communicated to him. The producers were furious that their own laziness had been exposed so dramatically on national television. The aftermath of this incident forced the Price is Right to fundamentally change how it operated. They retired countless prizes that had been used repeatedly, diversified their vendor relationships, and implemented randomization systems to prevent future exploitation by superfans. They even began adding arbitrary amounts to prize packages to throw off memorization attempts. One man's obsessive love for a game show had forced an entire television production to abandon practices it had used successfully for decades. The show's legendary predictability, which had been a comfortable constant for both producers and viewers, was eliminated forever because someone had actually been paying attention. The destruction of consumer trust represents another category of permanent change caused by individual actions. Leon Wood Bean established his company in 1912 with a revolutionary promise: 100% satisfaction, guaranteed customers could return any product at any time for any reason, no questions asked. This ironclad guarantee built one of the most trusted brands in American retail history. For over a century, this policy worked exactly as intended. Customers who wore out boots after 10 years of heavy use could return them for replacement jackets that finally failed after 2 decades of outdoor adventures were exchanged without hesitation. The guarantee created fierce brand loyalty and distinguished the company from competitors who offered limited warranty periods. The system began breaking down when a new type of customer emerged: the professional exploiter. These individuals weren't returning products they had purchased and used. Instead, they scoured thrift stores and yard sales, buying decades-old merchandise for pennies, then returning it to the company for full retail price cash refunds. This wasn't casual opportunism. Some individuals turned guarantee exploitation into a profitable business model, reportedly earning tens of thousands of dollars annually. They would arrive at stores with garbage bags full of ancient, deteriorated gear they had never owned, demanding immediate cash refunds at current retail prices. The financial impact was staggering. The company was hemorrhaging $250 million annually due to guarantee abuse. Management faced an impossible choice: raise prices significantly for honest customers to subsidize the exploiters, or eliminate the policy that had defined the brand for over a century. In 2018, the company announced a new policy limiting returns to 1 year with proof of purchase. The legendary guarantee that had survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and countless economic changes was eliminated because a small group of people decided to treat a customer service promise as a personal enrichment opportunity. The loss extends beyond corporate policy to cultural trust. The guarantee represented an era when businesses and customers operated on mutual respect and good faith. Its elimination serves as a permanent reminder that such trust can be destroyed by individuals who view ethical business practices as exploitable weaknesses. Environmental catastrophes caused by individual recklessness have created some of the most far-reaching prohibitions in modern history. The Florida Everglades were a balanced ecosystem until Hurricane Andrew struck in 1992, creating conditions for an ecological disaster that continues expanding today. The hurricane itself wasn't the problem. Natural disasters are inevitable, and ecosystems typically recover from weather-related damage. The permanent catastrophe began when the storm destroyed a massive reptile breeding facility operated by someone known as Professor Burt, who ran Queera Specialties. This wasn't a small pet shop operation. The facility housed hundreds, possibly thousands, of Burmese pythons bred for the exotic pet trade. When Hurricane Andrew tore the facility apart, these non-native predators escaped into the perfect habitat: warm, wet, and filled with prey animals that had no evolutionary defenses against giant constrictors. Richters. The aftermath was ecological devastation on an unprecedented scale. Today, scientists estimate between 100,000 and 300,000 Burmese pythons inhabit the Everglades. These apex predators can reach 20 feet in length and weigh over 200 pounds. They possess no natural enemies in their new environment and have systematically decimated native wildlife populations. The numbers are staggering. Raccoon populations have collapsed by over 90%. Opossum and bobcat numbers have experienced similar catastrophic declines. These massive constrictors are consuming deer, alligators, and virtually every other animal they encounter. They've fundamentally altered the food chain of one of America's most important ecosystems. The financial cost of this single individual's irresponsible breeding operation now exceeds hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Florida has implemented bounty programs, professional extermination services, and massive public hunting campaigns. None of these efforts have made meaningful progress against the python invasion. In 2021, Florida banned the sale, breeding, and private ownership of Burmese pythons and 15 other reptile species. This prohibition came 30 years too late. The regulatory response was essentially closing a barn door, decades after the livestock had already escaped and reproduced beyond control. One person's decision to operate a massive breeding facility without adequate containment protocols created an environmental disaster that will persist for generations. The Everglades ecosystem may never recover its original balance, and taxpayers will continue funding futile eradication efforts indefinitely. The manipulation of competitive systems represents another area where individual actions have forced permanent rule changes. Professional sports leagues operate under carefully constructed regulations designed to maintain fairness and entertainment value. When one person finds a way to exploit these systems, the response is typically swift and comprehensive. Lester Hayes dominated professional football as a cornerback for the Oakland Raiders during the late 1970s and early 80s. His secret weapon wasn't superior athleticism or tactical genius. It was an industrial adhesive called stickum, which he applied liberally to his hands, arms, uniform, and equipment. Hayes didn't use this substance in moderation. He covered himself so thoroughly with the sticky compound that teammates nicknamed him human fly paper. He kept jars of the substance on the sidelines and reapplied it constantly throughout games like some kind of athletic sunscreen. The results were undeniably effective. In 1980, Hayes intercepted 13 passes, won Defensive Player of the Year honors, and helped his team capture the Super Bowl championship. Any football that came within reach would simply stick to his body, making fumbles virtually impossible and interceptions routine. The competitive advantage was so overwhelming that it began affecting the game itself. Footballs became gummy, unusable messes after contact with Hayes officials, constantly had to remove balls from play because they had become coated with adhesive residue. Hayes required new uniforms at halftime because his existing jersey had become a toxic hazard. The National Football League realized that one player's extreme adhesive use was fundamentally breaking the competitive balance of professional football. In 1981, they implemented a complete ban on sticky substances. The rule became known as the Lester Hayes Rule and remains in effect today. The immediate impact was dramatic. Hayes' interception total dropped from 13 in 1980 to just 4 in 1981. His ban had an unintended consequence that continues affecting professional football today. It directly accelerated the development of high-grip receiver gloves that provide enhanced ball control through design rather than chemical enhancement. Technological advances can sometimes create catastrophic unintended consequences when individuals push innovations beyond safe limits. The 20th century produced several examples of brilliant inventors whose creations became global disasters because they prioritized immediate solutions over long-term safety considerations. Thomas Midgley Jr. represents perhaps the most destructive individual innovator in human history. Working as a chemical engineer for General Motors during the 1920s, he was assigned to solve the problem of engine knock in automobile engines. His methodical research led him to discover that adding tetraethyl lead to gasoline eliminated the knocking sound. Midgley knew his invention was dangerous. During the development process, he contracted severe lead poisoning that left him debilitated. Factory workers producing leaded gasoline experienced hallucinations, psychotic episodes, and death from lead exposure. The toxicity was undeniable and well documented from the beginning. Despite knowing the health risks, Midgley held a press conference where he dramatically poured leaded gasoline over his hands and inhaled its fumes for 60 seconds, claiming the substance was completely safe. He was deliberately concealing his own lead poisoning symptoms while promoting a product he knew was lethal. His invention worked perfectly for its intended purpose. It also spent the next 70 years pumping microscopic lead particles into the atmosphere of every major city on Earth. These neurotoxic particles systematically poisoned the developing brains of millions of children, with many researchers now connecting leaded gasoline exposure to the violent crime wave that plagued urban areas throughout the late 20th century. Midgley's destructive career didn't end with leaded gasoline. He was later assigned to develop safer refrigeration technology to replace the toxic gases like ammonia that could kill people if refrigeration systems leaked. His solution was dichlorodifluoromethane, which he branded as Freon. Freon appeared to be a miracle invention. It was non-toxic, non-flammable, and completely safe for human exposure. It revolutionized refrigeration, air conditioning, and aerosol spray applications. For 50 years, it was used in virtually every cooling system and spray can manufactured worldwide. The environmental consequences weren't discovered until decades later. Freon and related chlorofluorocarbons were light enough to float into the stratosphere, where they systematically destroyed the ozone layer that protects Earth from cancer-causing ultraviolet radiation. The result was a continent-sized hole in the ozone layer above Antarctica. Both of Midgley's major inventions are now banned worldwide. Leaded gasoline has been eliminated from most countries, and the Montreal Protocol prohibits chlorofluorocarbon production. The environmental damage from his innovations will persist for generations. In a final ironic twist, Midgley became disabled by polio later in life and invented an elaborate pulley system to help him get out of bed independently. In 1944, he became entangled in his own invention and was strangled to death by the ropes he had designed to assist his mobility. The medical field has also been shaped by individual cases that forced permanent changes in public health policy. Mary Mallon worked as a cook in affluent New York households during the early 1900s. She was also an asymptomatic carrier of Salmonella typhi, the bacteria that causes typhoid fever, which was often fatal in that era. Mallon herself remained perfectly healthy and genuinely didn't believe in germ theory or understand that she could transmit disease to others. However, everywhere she worked, people became sick and died. A public health investigator named George Soper tracked the pattern of outbreaks like a detective, discovering that they all trace back to one person, the family's cook. Between 1900 and 1907, Mallon worked for 8 different wealthy families. 7 of those households experienced typhoid outbreaks that infected 22 people total. When Soper confronted Mallon and requested samples of her blood, urine, and feces for testing, she chased him away with a carving fork. Health authorities eventually sent police to forcibly take Mallon into custody. She became the first healthy disease carrier identified in the United States and represented an unprecedented public health challenge. Officials quarantined her on North Brother Island for 3 years. In 1910, she was released under one strict condition: she must never work as a cook again. She agreed to this restriction and was given employment as a laundress, which paid significantly less than cooking work. Mallon resented the financial sacrifice and eventually changed her name to Mary Brown and returned to cooking. In 1915, a massive typhoid outbreak struck the Sloan Hospital for Women. 25 people were infected and 2 died. The source was traced to the cook, Mary Brown, who was actually Mary Mallon. Authorities were furious that she had violated her agreement and continued endangering public health. This time, they quarantined Mallon for life. She remained on North Brother Island for 23 more years until her death. Her case established the legal precedent for government authority to restrict individual liberty when someone poses a clear danger to public health, principles that continue governing infectious disease policy today. The digital age has created new categories of individual stupidity with global consequences. Gary Thurk worked as a marketing manager for Digital Equipment Corporation in 1978, when the internet was still called ARPANET, and connected only about 400 researchers and military officials. The network represented a collaborative academic environment where unsolicited commercial messages were unthinkable. On May 3, 1978, Thurk decided to promote his company's new computer system by sending a single mass email to all 393 ARPANET addresses on the West Coast. This was the first spam email in internet history, and the reaction was immediate and furious. ARPANET had been created for collaborative research, not commercial advertising. Network administrators and the Defense Communications Agency severely reprimanded Thurk for violating the fundamental principles of digital communication. Despite the overwhelming negative response and explicit warnings never to repeat such behavior, Thurk later boasted that his single email had generated $13 million in sales. He hadn't just proven that spam was possible, he had demonstrated that it was profitable. That single marketing email became the ancestor of the 300 billion spam messages transmitted daily across global networks today. Every junk mail filter, every report spam button, and the entire multi-billion-dollar email security industry exists because one marketing manager decided to turn a collaborative research network into a commercial advertising platform. The entertainment industry has been repeatedly forced to implement restrictions because individuals pushed acceptable behavior beyond reasonable limits. Jimmy Graham played tight end for the New Orleans Saints and stood 6 feet 7 inches tall while weighing 265 pounds. After scoring touchdowns, he would perform elaborate goalpost dunks that went far beyond traditional celebrations. Graham didn't simply dunk the football over the crossbar. He would grab the goalpost with his full weight and violently shake the entire structure, trying to demonstrate his physical dominance. Stadium maintenance crews would have to rush onto the field with ladders and levels to realign the precision-engineered goalposts that Graham had bent and twisted. The breaking point came during a nationally televised primetime game against the Atlanta Falcons in 2013. Graham scored a touchdown and performed such a violent goalpost dunk that he actually bent the crossbar. The game had to be stopped for 20 minutes while stadium staff attempted to repair the damaged equipment. This wasn't merely an inconvenience. A 20-minute delay during primetime television represents an economic catastrophe for broadcasters. Advertisers pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for 30-second commercial slots timed to the exact second unplanned delays, violate advertising contracts, and infuriate corporate sponsors who have paid premium rates for precisely scheduled exposure. The National Football League, which generates billions of dollars in television revenue, faced a multi-million-dollar problem caused by one player's refusal to celebrate within reasonable limits. In 2014, they officially banned goalpost dunking, creating what became known as the Jimmy Graham rule. Any player attempting to dunk the football would receive a 15-yard unsportsmanlike conduct penalty and substantial financial fines. Graham himself was fined $30,000 for dunking twice during preseason games after the ban was announced. One individual's excessive celebration eliminated one of professional football's most iconic touchdown celebrations forever. The goalpost dunk had been a harmless tradition that fans enjoyed for decades until one player's determination to break equipment forced league-wide prohibition. These stories reveal a disturbing pattern about human nature and social progress. Individual selfishness, recklessness, and refusal to respect reasonable boundaries have repeatedly forced society to implement permanent restrictions that affect millions of people. The most frustrating aspect is how easily most of these disasters could have been prevented through basic common sense, respect for safety protocols, or simple consideration for others. Consideration for others. These patterns of individual destruction extend beyond simple rule-breaking into deliberate fraud that corrupts entire systems of trust. The medical establishment faced exactly this challenge when confronted with a case that would fundamentally alter how society handles public health emergencies and personal responsibility. The emergence of modern public health law traces directly to one individual's stubborn refusal to acknowledge scientific reality. When health investigators finally connected a pattern of deadly outbreaks to a single source, they discovered something unprecedented. A healthy person who was systematically killing others through casual contact. This case established the legal framework that governments still use today when individual liberty conflicts with public safety. The precedent created during this crisis gave authorities the power to restrict someone's freedom indefinitely if they pose a clear danger to community health. These powers were invoked during recent pandemic responses, demonstrating how 19th century legal precedents continue shaping 21st century policy. What made this situation particularly tragic was the individual's complete inability to accept scientific evidence. Despite overwhelming proof of the connection between their presence and deadly disease outbreaks, they continued working in positions that maximized human contact. Their personal denial of germ theory didn't change the biological reality of bacterial transmission, but it did change how society manages infectious disease threats forever. The digital revolution created entirely new categories of selfish behavior with global consequences. Before mass communication networks existed, individual stupidity was limited by geography and technology. The internet changed that equation completely, allowing single acts of selfishness to affect millions of people simultaneously. The transformation from collaborative academic network to commercial battlefield happened almost overnight. What began as a peaceful digital village where researchers shared information became a chaotic marketplace where anyone could broadcast unsolicited messages to everyone else. The sacred principle of invited communication was shattered by someone who saw dollar signs instead of digital community. The financial success of that first commercial intrusion proved that violating social norms could be incredibly profitable. This economic incentive created an entire industry built on digital harassment that now consumes billions of dollars annually in defensive technology. Every spam filter, every email security system, and every report junk button exists because one person proved that antisocial behavior could generate massive profits. The entertainment industry has repeatedly learned that individual excess forces systemic change. Professional sports leagues carefully balance competition with spectacle, but they're constantly challenged by individuals who push acceptable behavior beyond reasonable limits. When someone discovers a loophole in the rules, their exploitation typically forces immediate and permanent corrections. The goalpost dunking controversy perfectly illustrates this dynamic. What started as harmless celebration gradually escalated into equipment destruction that threatened the financial foundation of professional sports. Broadcasting television contracts worth billions of dollars depend on precise scheduling that can't accommodate equipment repairs during live broadcasts. The individual responsible for this change wasn't malicious, but their refusal to moderate their behavior forced an entire industry to eliminate a tradition that fans had enjoyed for decades. The economic stakes were simply too high to allow one player's excessive celebrations to continue disrupting carefully orchestrated television productions. Consumer protection laws have similarly evolved in response to individual exploitation of corporate goodwill. When businesses operate on trust and good faith, they become vulnerable to people who view ethical policies as opportunities for personal enrichment. The most generous customer service policies in retail history were eliminated because a small group of individuals decided to treat corporate promises as exploitable weaknesses. The destruction of unconditional satisfaction guarantees represents a fundamental shift in business-consumer relationships. Companies that once trusted customers to use return policies reasonably were forced to implement restrictions, documentation requirements, and time limits. The era of handshake agreements and mutual respect was killed by people who saw customer service promises as get-rich-quick schemes. This change affects millions of honest customers who now face bureaucratic obstacles when returning legitimately defective products. The convenience and trust that characterized traditional retail relationships was sacrificed to prevent abuse by professional exploiters who turned customer service into personal profit centers. The 15 cases we've explored reveal an uncomfortable truth about human civilization. Every generation produces individuals who refuse to accept that rules apply to them, that safety protocols exist for reasons, or that their personal desires don't supersede everyone else's well-being. Their legacy isn't innovation or progress, but permanent restrictions that constrain human freedom forever. The next time you remove your shoes at airport security, stand in line for a return receipt, or encounter any of countless modern prohibitions, remember that someone's moment of selfishness created that inconvenience. These weren't unavoidable tragedies or natural disasters, but preventable catastrophes caused by people who simply couldn't resist pushing boundaries beyond breaking points. The world we inhabit today isn't the world we chose, but the world their recklessness forced us to accept.